On the eve of our wedding, news broke out that my fiancé's mistress had given birth to his child, causing quite a stir. Before I could even confront Julian Sterling, he brushed it off with an incredibly casual shrug. It was just an accident, Chloe. Just focus on getting the rehearsal dinner ready. Besides, your dad has late-stage stomach cancer. Calling off this alliance right now won't do either of our families any good. That night, he skipped our rehearsal dinner. Instead, he posted a photo of a newborn wrapped in a swaddle on his Snapchat story. When I FaceTimed him, he was literally bottle-feeding the baby. I've been busy taking care of the baby lately, so I don't have time to hang out with you. You know the Sterling family has always struggled with heirs. This baby is a big deal. He wiped a smear of formula from the baby's mouth. But don't worry. Once he's a month old, I'll send him to our private estate in Switzerland. You just need to show up as his mother for important public events. The title of Mrs. Sterling will always be yours. I stared at the matching diamond ring on his ring finger and laughed out loud. Julian, the wedding is off. He sneered. You're throwing a tantrum over this? Don't be so spoiled, Chloe. I hung up the FaceTime immediately and dialed Charles Sterling's private number. I heard you've been looking for a new wife lately? Why not consider me? I rubbed my stomach and let out a soft laugh. After all, Vance women are famous for our fertility gene. I can give you as many heirs as you want. Being the sole heir must be so lonely for Julian. I'll make sure he gets a few new uncles to keep him company. On the other end of the line, Charles's slightly raspy voice came through. Chloe, what kind of nonsense are you talking about? I chuckled, my voice dripping with mockery. You saw the news. Your precious adopted son is dirty, and he disgusts me. I'm serious. I want a replacement. Silence stretched over the line for a few seconds before his voice trembled slightly. We can't talk about this over the phone. I'm coming to see you right now. Sure. I'll be waiting at my place. My lips curved up, a look of absolute determination in my eyes. Charles was only in his early 30s, but due to a genetic fertility issue in the Sterling family, all his IVF attempts had failed. That was why he had no choice but to adopt Julian from a branch of the family to groom him as his successor. And the only reason my family, the Vances, could secure an alliance with the Sterlings was because of our women's legendary fertility gene. It was said that Vance women conceive almost instantly, often with twins or triplets, regardless of whether my father was sick or not. This marriage was a tacit necessity for both the Sterlings and the Vances. I just didn't expect Julian, whom I had dated for 5 years, to be stupid enough to knock up some girl right before the wedding, and expect me to just swallow my pride. But I, Chloe Vance, have never been the type to suffer in silence. Shortly after I hung up, my doorbell rang urgently. Charles stood at my door, a complex storm of emotions in his dark eyes. Before he could even speak, I grabbed him by his tie and dragged him into my apartment. Chloe, you. Before Charles could finish his sentence, I sealed his lips with a kiss. My fingers traced the collar of his shirt, slowly sliding inside. My actions spoke louder than any words. No hesitation. No holding back. I was showing him in the most direct way that I meant business. I could feel his internal struggle, but in the end, he surrendered to his desires. A night of wild passion. Afterward, he held me close, his voice husky. I have some urgent business to handle overseas. I have to leave tomorrow, and might be gone for a while. Wait for me to come back. Then, what about the wedding? He looked down at me, his eyes dark. It goes on as scheduled. I'll make sure to be back. You're the only daughter of the Vance family, and the most suitable bride for a Sterling. After Charles left, I wanted to go back to sleep, but my phone on the nightstand started buzzing. Julian's voice came through, sounding incredibly entitled. Chloe, get over here right now. Melanie is exhausted. Come help her watch the baby. I'm taking her to an auction to cheer her up. Taking care of the baby he had with another woman? Had he lost his absolute mind? Julian, I'm not your maid or your nanny. You've got the wrong person. He paused, then sighed. Chloe, Melanie went through so much pain to give birth to this child for the Sterlings. She did it for you too. This baby carries Sterling blood. As the future lady of the house, isn't it your job to learn how to care for him? His logic was so absurd it was laughable. I let out a mocking laugh. Julian, your logic is truly breathtaking. It's giving me goosebumps. We are over. Who you have babies with or who takes care of them has nothing to do with me. Do not call me again. Before he could say another word, I hung up. I lay back down, but the anger was boiling inside me. I opened my phone to browse the news to distract myself, only for a notification to pop up on Instagram. Sterling CEO spends millions to spoil his true love at luxury auction. I clicked it. The photo showed Julian holding Melanie at the auction. The way he looked at her was so tender. A level of devotion and love I had never seen on his face during our 5 years of dating. My heart twinged slightly. Over the years, for my birthdays, he would just have his assistant buy some random bag or jewelry on Amazon. He never picked anything himself, let alone spent this much effort to make me happy. They say a man's heart is where his money is. It seemed Julian had never loved me from the very beginning. To change my mood, I decided to go try on my wedding dress. But when I pushed open the boutique doors, I froze. In front of the full-length mirror, Melanie was elegantly twirling in a wedding dress. She looked dissatisfied, pointing at the bust area and telling the stylist, "Tighten it a bit more here. And the train, I think it would look better if it were 3 inches longer." That dress was custom designed. I had spent 6 months collaborating with the designer to perfect it. It was fully hand-embroidered, incredibly expensive, and held all my dreams for my future marriage. Pure rage surged into my brain. I took a deep breath, forced down my anger, stepped forward and said coldly, "Take it off. That's my wedding dress." Hearing my voice, Melanie flinched, shrinking back tearfully behind Julian, who was standing right next to her. "Can you not be so aggressive? You're scaring Melanie." His tone was accusatory, as if I were some hysterical psycho. I almost laughed in sheer disbelief. "Julian, that is my custom gown. It took 6 months of hand-stitching to make. What right does she have to wear it?" Julian's expression flickered with a hint of guilt. "Chloe, of course she has the right. She's the bride, so of course she's wearing the dress." I didn't understand what he was getting at. "I'll still sign the marriage papers with you. The alliance between the Vance and Sterling families remains valid." He paused, glancing back at Melanie. His eyes softened. "But Melanie went through hell to give me a child. I can't let her feel cheapened. So, I figured she should be the one to walk down the aisle at the ceremony. It'll give her some status." What did you just say?" I was shaking with anger. If I went along with this, my family and I would become the laughingstock of the high society. Julian seemed to think his arrangement was completely logical, his tone growing more confident. "Chloe, I know this isn't entirely fair to you, but Melanie really had a hard time. For the sake of the baby, just..." "Julian, you absolute bastard. You expect me to play along with this circus of a wedding?" I signed the marriage certificate, Melanie gets the wedding night, and then I have to play mother to your bastard child? Do you think I'm some beggar on the street begging for your scraps, Julian? My voice grew louder, drawing stares from other customers in the boutique. Melanie began to sob softly. "Please don't be mad, Chloe. I know my place. I just wanted to be a bride once. I know I don't deserve it." Julian frowned, giving me a warning look. "Chloe, my mind is made up. You'll agree to this whether you like it or not. If it weren't for my father's sake, do you think I'd even marry you?" I let out a cold laugh. It seemed Charles hadn't told him about the groom swap yet. "Fine." I looked him dead in the eye, my voice icy. "We would see. At the wedding, it wouldn't be him swapping brides. It would be me swapping grooms." Julian's brows knit together. He clearly didn't expect me to agree so easily, and his face filled with suspicion. Hiding behind him, Melanie's eyes flashed with triumphant glee. Over the next few days, photos of Julian and Melanie's pre-wedding shoot trended on Instagram for 3 days straight. The media still promoted it as the Vance Sterling wedding, but the bride in the photos was Melanie. To the public, everyone assumed she was the real heiress of the Vance family. My close friends called me in a panic, asking what was going on. The elite circle mocked me, whispering that I was such a desperate simp that I let a mistress steal my entire identity. But I ignored them all, focusing solely on taking care of my father. The doctor said his condition was deteriorating rapidly, and he needed to be hospitalized. I stayed by his side 24/7. I carefully filtered out all news about Julian and Melanie, terrified that the drama would stress him out. Yet, Melanie actually had the audacity to sneak into my dad's hospital room with Julian, while I was briefly away. The moment I walked back in, I saw Melanie holding a fashion magazine, pointing at the wedding photos, and speaking to my father in a sickeningly sweet voice. "Mr. Vance, look at how beautiful these photos are. Julian and I worked so hard on them. But to marry him in this dress, all the hard work was worth it. On the wedding day, I'll make sure you get the seat of honor." My father's face was pale as ash. His chest heaved violently, his hand clutching the bedsheets, his lips trembling as he tried to speak but couldn't. The heart monitor next to the bed suddenly began to beep frantically. "Dad." I let out a blood-curdling scream, rushing forward to slam the emergency call button. "Chloe, don't get so excited." Melanie purred, but I shoved her away with all my might. "Get out. Both of you, get the hell out of here." I roared, my eyes instantly filling with tears. "Quick. The patient is in critical condition. Prep for emergency resuscitation," the doctor shouted as they rushed in. The nurses pulled me back. I could only watch in horror as my father was wheeled into the ER. Julian tried to step forward to comfort me, but I slapped his hand away. "Don't touch me, you monster." I pointed right at his face, screaming. "You knew my dad was sick, yet you came here just to torment him. What is wrong with you?" Frightened, Melanie hid behind Julian, peeking out to say innocently, "Chloe, we just wanted to visit Mr. Vance and invite him to the wedding." Bullshit. Like a madwoman, I scrambled up from the floor to lunge at Melanie, But Julian grabbed me in a death grip. Chloe, calm down. Calm down. How can I calm down? That's my father. I thrashed in his arms, my nails scratching deep into his forearms. It was just an accident. Julian's voice was filled with irritation and anger he could barely hide. Besides, Melanie was only trying to be nice. Who knew he'd react this dramatically? He glanced at Melanie with an obvious protective instinct. Right now, the public thinks Melanie is the Vance heiress. If no one from your family shows up at the wedding, people will start questioning her identity. It won't look good for the Sterling reputation. My lips curled into a deeply sarcastic smile. Julian, are you blind or just incredibly stupid? You know exactly what Melanie is. She has nothing to do with the Vance family. She's just a home-wrecking gold digger who slept her way to the top. Julian's face darkened completely. He raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. My head whipped to the side, a sharp ringing echoing in my ears. Even if you're the one on the marriage license, Melanie is the only wife I will ever recognize. So keep your mouth shut. Those words felt like a dull knife sawing back and forth across my already shattered heart. But louder than the pain was a volcanic wave of pure, unadulterated hatred. We had been together for 5 years, and yet he could be this cruel. You don't need to show up at the wedding in 2 days, Julian said casually, though his voice carried a threat. Just stay in the hospital and keep your dad company. Without looking back, Julian waved at a few burly bodyguards standing at the end of the hallway. Watch her. Do not let her take a single step out of this hospital. The bodyguards immediately marched over, forming a human wall around me. I stared viciously at the direction where Julian had disappeared. He thought keeping me locked up in the hospital would let him marry Melanie in peace? In his dreams. I touched my stomach, pulled out my phone and made a call. The day of the wedding. Melanie smiled triumphantly, stroking the luxurious silk of her gown. So what if Chloe was the highborn Vance heiress? In the end, she got absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, Julian stood in the grand reception hall, looking highly uneasy. He had sent out hundreds of VIP invitations. Given the Sterling name, the venue should have been packed to the brim. Yet, with the ceremony minutes away, only a handful of guests had shown up. The massive hall looked embarrassingly empty. Melanie noticed it too when she walked out. Frowning, she tugged at Julian's arm, her voice trembling with anxiety. Julian, where is everyone? Why is it so empty? Julian's anxiety spiked. He signaled a waiter to call the family butler over. But instead of the head butler, a low-level maid appeared. Julian's temper flared instantly. Where is the butler? Why isn't he here? The maid trembled slightly, keeping her head low. The butler is busy managing the chairman's wedding. He can't get away. He said if you need anything, I can handle it. My father's wedding? Since when is my father getting married? To whom? Julian's voice faltered, his face turning pale. To the Vance heiress, Miss Chloe Vance. Julian's face froze in absolute disbelief. He mumbled. What? Say that again. Terrified by his expression, the maid stammered out. Right upstairs. The chairman is currently holding his wedding ceremony with Miss Chloe Vance. The silence in the lower ballroom was deafening. Melanie's face drained of all color, her hand slipping from Julian's sleeve as if his arm had suddenly turned to ice. Julian, what did that maid just say? Your father and Chloe? Julian didn't answer. His blood roared in his ears so loudly he could barely hear his own panicked breathing. His mind reeled, trying to connect the dots, but the sheer absurdity of it refused to take hold. His father? Charles Sterling? The ruthless, cold-blooded titan of the Sterling conglomerate marrying Chloe Vance? Nonsense. Julian snapped, his voice cracking with hysteria. He shoved the maid aside, his posture stiffening as he tried to regain control. My father is overseas. He left 4 days ago on a private jet for European acquisitions. This is a joke. Chloe hired these actors to humiliate us. Without waiting for a response, Julian grabbed the hem of his pristine tuxedo jacket and stormed out of the hall toward the private glass elevator that led to the grand skylight ballroom on the top floor. Melanie, struggling with the 3-foot embroidered train of the stolen gown, scrambled after him, her diamond heels clicking frantically against the marble floor. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, the heavy fragrance of white lilies, fresh rain, and expensive champagne flooded the air. Unlike the ghost town downstairs, the grand skylight ballroom was packed with every major political figure, billionaire, media mogul, and old money aristocrat in the country. The ceiling was a dome of crystal glass, showering natural sunlight over hundreds of high society guests who were softly clapping and cheering. Julian stood at the perimeter, his eyes wide, his body paralyzed. At the end of a 100-foot aisle paved with pure white orchids stood Charles Sterling. Charles looked breathtaking. He wore a bespoke charcoal black suit tailored to perfection, his broad shoulders and commanding presence effortlessly dominating the entire room. His sharp, sculpted jawline was set in an expression of quiet triumph, his dark, dangerous eyes fixed entirely on the woman walking down the aisle toward him. And that woman was Chloe. Chloe was a vision of untamed elegance. She didn't wear the gown Melanie had stolen. Instead, she wore a vintage, royal tear gown woven from moonlight white silk, studded with thousands of uncut raw diamonds that glittered with every step she took. Her veil cascaded down her back like a waterfall, and her face, flawless, glowing, and radiant, bore a smile of subtle, lethal satisfaction. Beside her, holding her arm with tears of pride in his eyes, was her father, my father, Mr. Vance. He wasn't dying. He wasn't hooked up to a heart monitor. He looked healthy, standing tall in a tailor-made suit, supported by the world's top medical team that Charles had flown in privately 3 days ago. Dad. Julian gasped, his voice trembling. No, this is impossible. As Chloe reached the altar, Charles stepped down one step, took her delicate hand in his large, warm palm, and kissed her knuckles softly in front of 300 high society witnesses. The priest's voice echoed softly through the crystal microphone. By the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Charles cupped Chloe's face, leaned down, and kissed her deeply, passionately, wrapping one arm around her slender waist. The applause in the room exploded. Like thunder. Stop! A shriek tore through the applause. Julian lost his mind. He shoved past 2 security guards at the rear aisle, his face twisted in an ugly mask of fury and shame. Stop this! Charles Sterling! What are you doing? The music cut out instantly. The 300 elite guests turned as one, looking at Julian as if he were a crazed street performer who had wandered into a royal palace. Julian marched up the aisle, pointing a shaking finger at Chloe. Chloe, you treacherous bitch. You couldn't handle me replacing you, so you set up this sick theatrical play. And you, he glared at Charles, his adoptive father. Father, have you lost your mind? She's my ex-fiancé. She's the woman I dumped. How could you let her trick you into this embarrassingly fake ceremony? The room went dead silent. Melanie finally caught up, panting, clutching her fake pearl necklace, hiding behind Julian. Charles didn't flinch. He slowly adjusted his onyx cufflinks, turned around, and placed a protective arm around Chloe's waist. His dark eyes flicked over Julian with the cold, unfeeling indifference one might offer a cockroach on the floor. A fake ceremony? Charles's deep, velvet baritone resonated through the ballroom sound system. Julian, you seem confused. The marriage certificate was signed and registered with the state government at 8 o'clock this morning. Chloe is legally, officially, and permanently my wife. Julian felt the floor drop out from beneath him. What did you say? Chloe leaned her head against Charles's shoulder, looking down at Julian with pure, unadulterated amusement. Julian, didn't you hear your father? Chloe sneered, her voice dropping into a purr. According to family hierarchy, you should show some manners. She smiled sweetly, resting her hand over Charles's chest. Come on, Julian. Address me properly. Call me mother. Mother. Julian's voice reached an octave so high it cracked. His chest heaved, his eyes bloodshot. You want me to call you mother? You're 26 years old. I dated you for 5 years. And for 5 years, you were a disappointing, ungrateful boy, Chloe replied. Smoothly, stepping down the altar steps, her diamond-studded train rustling softly against the marble. She looked at Melanie, whose face was twitching in horror. And I see you brought your little nanny with you. How sweet. Did you come up here to offer your blessings to the new chairman and chairwoman of the Sterling Group? Melanie backed away a step, clutching the stolen wedding dress around her waist. She looked around at the guests, the very aristocrat she had dreamed of impressing. But nobody was looking at her with envy. They were looking at her with disgust, whispering behind their silk hand fans. Is that the mistress? The one who gave birth out of wedlock? She's wearing a stolen gown while standing next to the disinherited adopted son. How pathetic. Look at Mr. Vance over there. He looks completely fine. Julian lied about his father-in-law dying just to hide his own affair. Julian couldn't handle the whispers. He lunged toward Charles. Father, you're doing this to spite me, just because I had a child with Melanie. I brought an heir to the Sterling family. You should be thanking me. You couldn't produce an heir, so I did it for you. Slap. The sound of the slap echoed through the entire ballroom like a gunshot. It wasn't Charles who hit him. It was Mr. Vance. Chloe's father stepped forward, his eyes blazing with righteous fury, wiping his palm on his handkerchief. You arrogant, uncultured brat. You threatened my life, locked my daughter in a hospital room, and used my illness to humiliate the Vance family. You think you're a Sterling? You're nothing but a stray dog. Charles took an out of pity. Julian stumbled back, holding his bruised cheek, shocked that the man he had tormented days ago had just struck him in public. You old ghost. Enough. Charles's voice cut through the air like a steel blade. The ambient noise in the hall died immediately. Charles walked forward, taking Chloe's hand and holding it firmly in his own. He looked at the family lawyer, standing discreetly by the front row, and gave a slight nod. Lawyer Vance, Chloe's uncle and the chief legal counsel for the Sterling conglomerate, stepped forward with a black leather folder. Julian Sterling, Lawyer Vance announced loudly so the entire room could hear. As of 9 a.m. today, Chairman Charles Sterling has formally exercised Clause 14 of the Sterling Family Adoption Trust Agreement. Julian froze. Clause 14. Clause 14 states, Lawyer Vance read coldly, that if the adopted heir engages in acts of moral turpitude, public defamation of the family name, unauthorized corporate asset transfer, or severe disrespect toward the head of the house, the adoptive agreement is instantly null and void. Lawyer Vance raised his head, looking Julian straight in the eye. Your adoption has been revoked. You are no longer Julian Sterling. Your name has been legally reverted to Julian Miller. You are no longer the CEO of Sterling Media. Your proxy voting rights are cancelled, and all black credit cards under the Sterling corporate account have been frozen as of 5 minutes ago. Melanie let out a sharp gasp, grabbing Julian's arm. Julian, what is he talking about? Frozen. What about my monthly allowance? What about the villa in Switzerland? Julian's phone in his pocket began to buzz frantically. He pulled it out with shaking hands. Notifications flooded his screen in a red wave. Alert! Your Sterling Group Amex Centurion has been declined. Alert! Access to the Sterling private jet fleet has been revoked. Alert! Your access to the Royal Bay penthouse has been terminated by security. No, 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 no! Julian screamed, frantically typing on his phone. Father, you can't do this to me. I've worked for the Sterling Group for 8 years. You didn't work for it, Julian, Charles said, his dark eyes devoid of any warmth. You squandered it. You spent corporate funds on auctions to buy cheap trinkets for your mistress. You ruined a multi-billion-dollar strategic alliance with the Vance family, and you dared to lay a hand on my wife. Charles raised his hand and gestured to the head of security. Throw them out. They are trespassing on private property. 4 6'4" security guards in dark suits stepped forward, grabbing Julian by his arms and twisting them behind his back. Get your hands off me. I'm the heir. I'm Julian Sterling. Julian thrashed wildly, but the guards dragged him backward down the long aisle like a sack of trash. Melanie panicked. She tried to run after him, but her long, stolen dress got caught under her high heel. Rip. The delicate, hand-stitched silk tore straight down the center seam, revealing her cheap shapewear underneath. She collapsed onto the marble floor in front of 300 laughing elites, sobbing in utter humiliation as the security guards dragged her out by her ankles alongside Julian. Chloe stood beside Charles, watching the double doors slam shut behind them. She turned to Charles, a genuine, radiant smile gracing her lips. That was remarkably cathartic, husband. Charles looked down at her, the icy hardness in his eyes instantly melting into a deep, possessive tenderness. He wrapped his hand around her waist, pulling her close against his chest. That was just the appetizer, my love, Charles whispered near her ear, his breath warm against her skin. The real show hasn't even begun. 2 weeks after the wedding, the high society world was still shaken by the quiet revolution that had taken place inside the Sterling family. Julian Miller, formerly Julian Sterling, was forced to move out of his $20 million penthouse into a cramped 2-bedroom rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. Without the Sterling name, he was nothing. The luxury brands that used to send him free products blocked his number. The high society friends who used to kiss his feet refused to take his calls. To make matters worse, Melanie was driving him insane. Julian, the formula is finished. Why haven't you bought more? Melanie shrieked from the tiny living room, holding the screaming baby in her arms. She was wearing a faded housecoat, her hair greasy, her face stripped of the expensive makeup she used to wear. And the landlord came by today. He said if we don't pay the rent by Friday, he's locking us out. Julian sat at the small kitchen table, staring at a stack of rejection letters from various financial firms. Shut up, Melanie, Julian roared, slamming his fists on the table. Do you think this is easy for me? I applied to 6 firms today, and every single one of them rejected me because my father put out a silent blacklist. No one in this city will hire me. Then go apologize to him. Melanie cried, tears streaming down her face. Go. Kneel in front of Charles. Tell him you were wrong. Tell him the baby needs money. Apologize. Julian laughed bitterly. He married Chloe. Do you know what they're calling me online? They're calling me the dumbest son in history. I gave up the Sterling Empire for you and a bastard. Don't you dare call my son a bastard. Melanie screamed, throwing a plastic baby bottle at his head. The bottle shattered against the wall, milk splattering over Julian's only remaining designer suit. While Julian and Melanie were drowning in the mud of their own making, the top floor of the Sterling Tower was bathed in golden afternoon sunlight. Chloe sat in the executive chair of the chairwoman's office, wearing a sharp, white Alexander McQueen power suit. Beside her stood Charles, leaning over her shoulder, reviewing a series of corporate acquisition files. Your father's company, Vance Pharmaceuticals, has fully integrated into our global supply chain, Charles said softly, his fingers gently playing with a strand of Chloe's dark hair. The stock price hit an all-time high this morning. Chloe smiled, leaning back against his chest. I know. My dad called me an hour ago. He's currently on a golf course in Hawaii with his old friends, looking healthier than ever. Thank you, Charles, for everything. Charles leaned down, kissing her temple softly. You don't need to thank your husband, Chloe. Everything I have is yours. Suddenly, a soft knock came at the door, and Charles's personal physician, Dr. Harrison, stepped inside holding a leather folder with a look of utter disbelief and joy on his face. Chairman, Mrs. Sterling. Dr. Harrison's voice was trembling slightly. The private blood panel results from your routine checkup yesterday just came back. Chloe sat up straight, a slight blush creeping onto her cheeks. She had been feeling unusually tired and nauseous over the last few days, but she had assumed it was just stress from the corporate transition. Charles's body went completely rigid. His hands gripped the edge of the desk. What are the results, Harrison? Speak clearly. Dr. Harrison unfolded the paper, his hands shaking. Chairman, as you know, for the past 12 years, every medical facility in the world declared that your sperm motility was effectively zero due to your rare genetic condition. We tried every advanced IVF treatment available, and all failed. Get to the point, Charles demanded, his heart hammering against his ribs. Mrs. Sterling is pregnant, Dr. Harrison announced, a tear of joy leaking from his eye. And it's not just one. The HCG levels are astronomically high, based on the initial ultrasound scan. Dr. Harrison pulled out a black and white printout and set it gently on the desk. Mrs. Sterling is carrying triplets. 3 healthy, natural human embryos. The office went dead silent. Chloe stared at the tiny scan, her hand instinctively moving down to rest over her lower abdomen. The legendary Vance fertility gene, the gene that Julian had mocked and dismissed, had just accomplished what 12 years of modern medicine could not. Charles stared at the paper as if it were a holy document. The ruthless, emotionless billionaire who had conquered the business world without blinking a single eye suddenly felt his vision blur with tears. He dropped to his knees right beside Chloe's chair. He wrapped his large arms around her waist, burying his face against her stomach, his shoulders trembling as he let out a choked, ragged breath. Chloe, Charles whispered, his voice cracking with pure, overwhelming emotion. My love, my life, thank you. Chloe smiled softly, running her fingers through his dark hair, looking down at the man who had given her everything. I told you, Charles, Chloe murmured, her eyes shining with quiet victory. Vance women keep our promises. I told you I'd give you heirs. She looked out the high glass window overlooking the entire city. Julian wanted an heir to secure his place? Chloe thought coldly. Now I'm giving Charles 3. And when they are born, Julian won't just be an outcast. He'll have 3 infant uncles who own every single penny he ever dreamed of inheriting. The news of Chloe's pregnancy couldn't be kept secret for long. 3 weeks later, the Sterling conglomerate officially released a press statement. Chairwoman Chloe Vance Sterling is expecting triplets. The financial markets exploded. Sterling Group stock surged by 15%. In a single afternoon, the narrative of Charles Sterling being infertile was shattered overnight, replaced by legendary tales of the power of the Vance Sterling union. In the cramped, smelly living room of his cheap apartment, Julian stared at the news broadcast on his cracking television screen. The screen showed Charles holding Chloe carefully as they stepped out of a private clinic, surrounding her with 30 bodyguards, looking at her with a level of worshipful devotion that made Julian's stomach churn with pure acid. Triplets. 3 heirs. No, it's impossible. Julian screamed, throwing his cheap mug against the television screen. The glass shattered, spark plugging into darkness. He was infertile. Every doctor in Europe said he couldn't have children. She cheated on him. She must have cheated on him. Melanie stepped out of the bedroom, holding the crying baby. Julian, stop screaming. You'll wake the baby up. Julian whirled around, his eyes wild, staring at Melanie, then down at the baby. In her arms. A dark, venomous thought suddenly began to root itself deep inside Julian's mind. Wait. Julian remembered something. When Melanie first told him she was pregnant 6 months ago, it was right after he had returned from a 2-week business trip in Los Angeles. She had claimed the baby was his, crying that she was scared, using the baby to push him into breaking his engagement with Chloe. At the time, Julian was so intoxicated by the idea of bringing an heir to Charles that he had never questioned it. He had never ordered a formal DNA test, because he was too arrogant, too sure of his own virility. Julian slowly walked toward Melanie, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. Julian, why are you looking at me like that? Melanie backed away, terrified by the psychotic look in his eyes. Melanie, Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. Where did you get the money? For that luxury auction 2 months ago? The one where I bought you that diamond necklace. I told you my savings. You didn't have savings. You were a nightclub promoter before you met me. Julian lunged forward, grabbing her by her collar, snatching the baby from her arms and setting the crying child onto the sofa. Where were you the week before? I went to Los Angeles. Julian, let go of me. You're crazy, Melanie shrieked, clawing at his face. Julian dragged her to the closet, ripped open her old designer handbag, and dumped the contents onto the floor. Receipts, cheap hotel keycards, and a small, hidden USB drive scattered across the carpet. Julian snatched the USB drive, plugged it into his old laptop, and opened the files. Inside were hundreds of messages between Melanie and a man named Marcus, a notorious high society gigolo and petty blackmailer, who frequented the VIP clubs downtown. Message from Marcus, 8 months ago, is the rich boy buying it? Melanie's reply, yeah, Julian is an idiot. He thinks the kid is his. As soon as he signs the marriage papers, I'll bleed his trust fund dry and give you your cut. Julian's brain went entirely blank. The blood drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. He hadn't just sacrificed his status, his wealth, his inheritance, and his family name for a woman he loved. He had given up the Sterling empire for a gigolo's child. He was a cuckold, a fraud, a world-class fool. You bitch. Julian roared, a sound of absolute, shattering madness escaping his throat. He threw himself at Melanie. The apartment devolved into a blood-soaked brawl of screaming, crashing furniture, and shattered glass. By midnight, the rain was pouring over the city in torrents. Inside the grand Sterling estate, the sprawling 60-acre historical castle on the edge of the capital, the atmosphere was warm and quiet. Chloe lay on the master bed, wrapped in a plush silk robe, reading a book on prenatal care. Charles sat beside her, his laptop open, quietly approving a series of charitable foundations set up under Chloe's name. Suddenly, the internal intercom on Charles's desk beeped red. Charles picked it up, his brow furrowing. Speak. Chairman, the head of estate security reported, his voice tight. An intruder has just breached the outer gate perimeter. It's Julian Miller. Chloe stopped reading, looking up. Julian. He crashed his broken sedan through the front iron gate, the chief continued. He's armed with a hunting knife, sir. He's completely unhinged. He's screaming for Mrs. Sterling. Charles's expression didn't change, but the air in the bedroom instantly dropped by 20 degrees. A dark, predatory stillness settled over him. Keep him in the courtyard, Charles said quietly. I'm coming down. Charles. Chloe grabbed his arm, her eyes filled with concern. Don't go out. They're alone. He has nothing left to lose. He's dangerous. Charles looked down at Chloe, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing over her lips. My love, Charles murmured, his voice soft, almost romantic. A dog that bites. Its master doesn't just get put outside. It gets put down. He kissed her forehead, stood up, pulled a dark velvet coat over his shoulders, and walked out of the room. Down in the vast, rain-slicked stone courtyard of the estate, searchlights illuminated the storm like daytime. Julian stood near the fountain, his clothes soaked through, covered in mud and cuts from his earlier fight with Melanie. His hair was wild, his eyes sunken and psychotic. He held a rusty 10-inch hunting knife in his right hand, his knuckles white. 10 armed security officers stood in a circle around him, their suppressed rifles aimed directly at his chest, waiting for the command. The double oak doors of the main hall opened. Charles walked out smoothly, holding a large black umbrella, completely unbothered by the cold wind. He stopped at the top of the marble steps, looking down at Julian as if looking at a piece of garbage floating in a gutter. Julian, Charles said calmly over the sound of the rain. You are trespassing. Charles, Julian screamed, his voice raw, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. You destroyed my life. You took my money, my title, my future, and Chloe. You destroyed your own life, Julian, Charles replied coldly. You threw away a kingdom for a whore and a child that wasn't even yours. Julian flinched as if struck by lightning. You knew. I've known for 3 weeks, Charles said, a faint, cruel smile touching the corner of his lips. I received the DNA report from the hospital the day Melanie gave birth. I let you keep the child because I wanted you to feel the full weight of your own stupidity." Julian let out an inhuman howl of grief and rage. The realization that Charles had watched him play the fool, allowing him to ruin himself for a lie, broke the final thread of his sanity. "I'll kill you. I'll kill both of you." Julian lunged forward, raising the knife, sprinting up the marble steps toward Charles. He didn't make it 3 steps. Bang, bang. 2 rubber-tipped high-impact tactical rounds struck Julian precisely in both kneecaps. The sound of bones shattering was instantly swallowed by the sound of thunder. Julian collapsed onto the wet stone steps, dropping the knife, howling in agony. As he clutched his shattered knees, rolling in the freezing rain, Charles slowly walked down the steps, stopping right beside Julian's bleeding form. He didn't even look down at him. He simply raised his custom leather shoe and stepped heavily onto Julian's right hand, crushing the fingers that had held the knife into the cold stone. Julian screamed, sobbing, vomiting rainwater and blood. "Father! Father! Please spare me. I was wrong. I was wrong." Charles bent down slightly, his voice dropping into a whisper that only Julian could hear. "Don't call me father," Charles whispered, his voice dark and merciless. "You are a worm, Julian. And tomorrow, you will wake up in a state penitentiary, facing charges of attempted murder, high-level corporate embezzlement, and armed trespassing." Charles stepped off his hand, turning his back on him. "Take him away," Charles instructed the guards. "Clean the stone. My wife doesn't like the smell of trash." 7 months later, spring had returned to the capital. The royal gardens of the Sterling estate were blooming with millions of white roses, filling the crisp morning air with a sweet, intoxicating scent. In the private, state-of-the-art medical wing constructed inside the Sterling estate, a soft, loud cry broke through the quiet morning. "Wah!" Then a second cry. "Wah!" And finally a third. The head surgeon stepped out of the delivery suite, wiping sweat from his forehead, holding 3 birth records in his hand. Charles, who had been standing outside the doors for 6 hours without moving an inch, stepped forward immediately. His heart was beating faster than it ever had in his entire life. "Doctor." Charles's voice was tense. "Congratulations, Chairman Sterling." The doctor beamed, bowing deeply. 3 perfectly healthy babies. 2 boys and a girl. The mother is doing wonderfully. She is conscious, resting, and asking for you." Charles didn't even wait to hear the rest. He shoved past the medical team and walked into the pristine delivery room. Chloe lay on the luxurious bed, her face pale and damp with sweat, but her eyes were glowing with an ethereal, victorious light. Resting in 3 small heated cribs beside her bed were 3 tiny, perfectly formed babies wrapped in soft cashmere swaddles. Charles walked to the side of the bed, dropping to his knees, taking Chloe's hand and pressing it tightly against his face. "Chloe," Charles whispered, his eyes filled with tears. "You did it, you brought them into the world." Chloe stroked his cheek softly, a gentle smile spreading across her lips. "I told you, husband. I don't break my promises." Charles stood up, carefully picking up the middle swaddle, their daughter, and holding her against his chest, while looking at his 2 sons. The Sterling family, once doomed to extinction under a barren branch, now possessed 3 direct, undisputed heirs to a multi-trillion-dollar global empire. That evening, a grand press release was issued across every major news network on the planet. Official announcement. Chairwoman Chloe Vance Sterling gives birth to triplets, Alexander, Vance, and Victoria Sterling. The Sterling Family Trust has officially allocated a 30% equity stake in the conglomerate to the newborn heirs under the total guardianship of Chairwoman Chloe Sterling. Across the nation, people celebrated the news. The Vance and Sterling names were cemented into the history books as the most powerful dynasty of the century. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, in a grim, high-security state prison, a television mounted in the cold, gray mess hall played the news broadcast. Julian sat at a stainless steel table, wearing a faded orange prison uniform. His hair was shaved to the scalp, his face bore scars from prison brawls, and his broken knees, which had never healed properly, forced him to sit in a rusted wheelchair. On the screen he saw Chloe, looking like an absolute empress, wearing a diamond crown at a private royal gala, leaning against Charles's side as they presented their 3 beautiful babies to the world. Beside them stood Mr. Vance, looking healthy, laughing happily as he held his grandchildren. Julian stared at the screen, his chest heaving, his breath catching in his throat. In that single moment, the full horror of his choices crushed what little was left of his soul. He had possessed everything. He had been the sole heir to the greatest fortune in the world. He had a beautiful, loyal, brilliant woman from a legendary family who was willing to marry him, and he had thrown it all away. He had traded a kingdom for a gold digger who cheated on him, a child that wasn't his, and a prison sentence that would last until his hair turned gray. Chloe. Julian wept, tears flowing down his dirty, scarred cheeks, his voice lost in the roaring laughter of the prisoners around him. Chloe. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But no one heard him. His voice was swallowed by the cold, damp shadows of his cell, while high above the world, in a palace built on gold and unconditional love, Chloe Vance Sterling raised her wine glass under the stars, surrounded by her husband, her father, and her 3 children. She had fought back, she had taken the crown, and she had won everything.